Thank you all for attending this introduction to open access. It's one of our Open Education Week events. We had copyright and open licensing a session yesterday. It went really well. Lots of interesting questions. And we even had time for an interactive quiz at the end. Later today, we're actually going to play the game of open access with some other librarians. So if you need the link for that, just let me know. I will pop it in chat at the end of this session. I think we're having it at 4 o'clock Mountain Time. And my name is Dan Cocroft. I'm the OER librarian at Athabasca University. And OER stands for Open Educational Resources. So on Thursday, we'll be talking about open educational resources. On Friday, we'll be talking about basically everything in the kitchen sink. So everything that doesn't fit into these three first categories. And if you're really interested in open education and you want to know more and join a community of people talking about it, on Wednesday, we have our open community of practice at noon. And that's open to anyone to join. And again, just contact me and I'll invite you for sure. It's more of a conversation rather than just me talking to you like I will today. So before I actually begin the presentation, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. So Athabasca University is a university that really serves across Canada. So it's not in one place, but the campus is. The campus is on the border of Treaty 6 and Treaty 8. So I want to acknowledge and recognize that this is traditional and ancestral land. It's home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and it's the traditional homeland to the Cree, Dene, and Métis. It includes neighbors from Alexander Cree Nation, Alexei Nakota Sioux Nation, Enoch Cree Nation, Paul First Nation, Athabasca Chippewayan First Nation, Fort Chippewayan Métis, and the Mikisew Cree First Nation. Me personally, I'm on Vancouver Island, so I'm on the west coast, and I am on the traditional territory of the Comox, Coast Salish, and Timuc peoples. So we skipped one far too ahead there. So today we're going to talk about what open access means, the benefits it provides to creators and consumers, and how to find open access, and finally how to publish your own. I'm going to share a link in the chat here for our open access LibGuide. It introduces researchers to the open access publishing and its benefits, Creative Commons licenses, how to find and publish OA themselves, and there's a glossary as well. So it's basically an expansion of what we're talking about today. So let me just pop that in the chat. So I think a good place for us to start. A good place for us to start is the question: what is open access? So open access advocate Peter Suber, he offers a really clear definition. He says, the basic idea of open access is simple. Make research literature available without price barriers and without most permission barriers. We're going to talk about permissions a bit more later, so that becomes really clear to you. But what is open access, right? Open access refers to freely available. It's digital, online, licensed online information. So open access scholarly literature is free of charge, always, and often carries less restrictive copyright and licensing barriers than maybe traditional works would. That's true for both readers, users, and authors. It's kind of important to note the difference. So freely available doesn't mean openly licensed. You might find stuff on the internet that might be free to read, but unless it's like otherwise specified, it might still be subject to copyright, and the use is outlined by the creator. So open access, on the other hand, is openly licensed. So that means it's been released under a license that allows readers to, at minimum, share and read the work without paying or requesting permission to do so. And apologies to those who attended yesterday's session. There's a little bit of overlap, but I feel like this is really important to talk about. So we're going to talk about licensing first, just to get a better idea of what that is. So at its heart, a license is about permission. In the context of copyright, a license is about the permission granted to the copyright owner to another person to use a copyright protected work. That's subject to terms and conditions, maybe like payment. Often we see licenses are negotiated between a copyright owner and a user. It'll outline the ways in which someone can use a work for a limited period of time. So in this way, licenses frequently look like commercial agreements or contracts. That's kind of what you think of when you think of licensing. But because licenses are mostly about permission, a license can be granted informally. It can be over email, and in some cases it can even be spoken, and that doesn't make it any less valid or enforceable. So to reiterate, a license is about the permission granted by the copyright owner to another person to use the copyright protected work. These licenses exist on a spectrum. On the left, we can see all rights reserved. All the way on the right is the public domain. And in the middle, we see some rights reserved. So we're going to talk about each one of these shortly here. On the left, we see the term all rights reserved. You see this phrase a lot in like the introduction to a book, like the very first few pages there. It's often included with the copyright symbol. It's actually just a formality, typically used to indicate the copyright holder reserves or keeps all the rights provided to them by copyright law. So in Canada, we have certain rights granted to us by the Copyright Act. If you want to know more about those, check out the recording of yesterday's session. And though this term, all rights reserved, might be useful to clarify how we can use a work, it doesn't actually have any legal meaning anymore. Here I use it to represent the kind of the most closed license possible. It's a statement that indicates that there's no additional permissions given outside of what the law allows. One thing to note is that an employer might have a different definition of what counts as your work and your intellectual property, and we'll talk about that specifically in relation to AU in a moment. When you have a copyrighted work, when you create something, it's all you have to do is fix it in a fixed format. So you can't just have an idea in your head. You have to write it down or record it in some way. But once you've done that, there's no application, there's no symbol or statement that needs to be written down anywhere to grant you those protections. So in the middle of this licensing spectrum, we see I've written there some rights reserved. There's also the CC logo there, which stands for Creative Commons. So another way to think of some rights reserved is open licensing. So it's a plural permission. Instead of communicating on a person-to-person basis how someone's work can be used, a license outlines how everybody can use that work. A work can mean any original creation. That could be a textbook, a video, a song, a document, a piece of software, basically anything that can be copyright protected. With an open license, the creator retains copyright to the work, but they can choose how to license it. So they can let others use it freely, build on it, customize it, or alter it. It's also important to remember that unless you transfer copyright, copyright belongs to the author of a work, and only copyright holders can designate how their work is used by others. So only copyright holders can decide which license applies to the work. Far right of the spectrum here is public domain. So if a book or a song or a movie or a piece of artwork is in the public domain, then it's not protected by intellectual property. So copyright, trademark, or patent laws. That means it's free for you to use without permission. As a general rule, most things that are in the public domain enter the public domain because of old age. I believe in Canada, it's now the life of the author plus 70 years. After that, something enters the public domain. So let's talk about open licensing in a little more detail here. Whoops, I skipped a few slides here. These were, yes. So example here of the public domain is this video. I hope you can see it. It's a public domain video of a car, I think in the 1950s or 60s. And because it's in the public domain, I don't have to attribute it at all. I don't have to note who made it or link to the license because there is no license. I can use it or alter it in any way I want. So now we can talk about open licensing in a bit more detail. So when a work is created, like I mentioned before, the creator retains copyright in that work, but they can choose to openly license it if they want, and they can let other people use it in any way, like they can customize it, build on it, or alter it, or just share it. When you apply an open license to a work, it makes permissions transparent, explicit, and straightforward. So some open licenses give you permission or give anybody permission to use the work at no cost. They might allow anyone to modify the work with little or no restriction, but all of them do require a statement of attribution. So that's just an acknowledgement of the original author's work and a link back to the license applied. At the end of this presentation, I'll show you how I've licensed this one and explain a bit more about linking. A specific type of open licensing is Creative Commons. Now there's quite a few different open licensing, I guess, what is the right word? Schemas, I guess, is a word you could use. But specifically, they apply to other formats. So computer code is often a GNU public license. We'll talk about that on Friday. But for most things, one of the most common and widely used licensing systems is Creative Commons. It's a set of licenses that help creators clearly specify how their work is to be used, and it's all within existing copyright law. So these licenses are global, they're free to use, they're up to date, and they're accepted as a global standard for open licensing. When I checked their website last time, they said over 2 billion works online make use of Creative Commons licenses. That's across over 9 million websites. So it's a movement that's clearly growing and more things are being added every day. So Creative Commons licenses use icons and simple language so that creators can make their intentions clear. and users can be really certain of how their use of the work is legal. A Creative Commons license might be indicated with an abbreviation. It might be indicated with just descriptive text or even an icon. There are 6 Creative Commons licenses that you can use to show how your work can be used. And I will break them down for you. They're basically divided into 4 different elements with a bunch of different combinations. The first is BY, or by, as I like to call it. It represents attribution. So every single Creative Commons license has a by statement on it. So this icon means that you have to provide attribution by giving credit to the creator of the work in any way they've requested. Typically, that will be with a link to the original work. Next element is ND. So it means no derivatives. Write that down, it might be on the test later. So this icon means that modified versions of the original work can't be shared with others. Typically, that's where we draw the line between open access and OER, and we'll talk more about that. And the third element is SA. This means share alike. This icon means that the original work, it can be modified, but the new work must be shared under the same license. So a lot of people, when they're making something, they'll add maybe a no derivatives clause or something like that. And they don't want the work to become more closed. So they include the SA clause in the license to make sure that whatever derivatives are made from their material, it's always going to be licensed in the same way. Finally, we have NC, so this is non-commercial. This icon means that you can use the work for non-commercial purposes only, as is or modified. Finally, we have an extra bonus Creative Commons license, but it's not really a Creative Commons license because it doesn't count as a license. This is a CC0 mark. It's Creative Commons attempt to kind of emulate the functionality of a public domain designation. So it allows users to fully and wholly release their work without restriction. It's not the same as public domain, but it's basically equivalent. As I mentioned before, all these different elements can be combined to make your own license. And those licenses exist on Spectrum. So I think, yeah, it's 6 possible licenses. For example, if a creator wanted to share their work, but they didn't want other people to adapt it, but they wanted people to sell the work or be able to sell the work, they might consider using a CC BY and C license. So that means Creative Commons, attribution, non-commercial. So the work must be attributed, but it can't be used for commercial purposes. It's also worth noting that some licenses are more open or closed than others, but they're not better or worse than each other. They are best when they serve your needs, if that makes sense. They simply really provide the permissions designated by the creator. So now that you've kind of refreshed your memory on what counts as open access, with that designation between no derivatives and derivatives, we can talk a bit about the history of open access material and why you should use it. So we can kind of trace the origins of open access back to 1991. That's a year up before I was born. So I don't know if you've ever seen the website Arxiv, I think is how you pronounce it, ARXIV. It's a open access repository for physics papers specifically. It allows authors to publish preprints or early versions of their texts online, and people can just read them at no cost. So that's really where the movement started. We have some other major players like Peter Suber or Stephen Harned, who kind of pushed the movement along. In 2001, we had the Budapest Open Access Initiative. And in 2003, we had the Berlin Declaration on Open Access to Knowledge and the Sciences and Humanities. All that is kind of free open educational resources, and we've slowly come to the world that we have today. Now we can talk about some of the benefits of what these people have made possible with these open licensing opportunities. So it's not just about making your content more available online. For researchers, there's so many more benefits. One of those benefits is more exposure for your work. So instead of being hidden behind a paywall, open access means more readers, it means more potential collaborators, more citations for your work, and ultimately more recognition for you and your institution. There are quite a few studies that show that definitely there's increased citations if you publish your work as open access. A second benefit might be that practitioners can apply your findings. So it really expands the number of potential contributors to research. It's from just institutions wealthy enough to afford like journal subscriptions to anyone with an internet connection. Let's say you're a dentist, you could access cutting edge research without having a subscription to like expensive journal or an institutional access of some kind. And public access is another benefit. So it kind of might be obvious. They receive a higher citation rate. More people can read it. But there's something to be said about sharing your work with everyone without restriction. There's so many people out there who might not even be academics, and publishing your research under an open access license, it helps create a more like equitable world. Now, where can you find open access research? Whether you want to release your own or you want to find it, there's several great places online. One I recommend is CORE. It's Connecting Repositories. It's the world's largest aggregator of open access research papers from repositories and journals. It's based out of the Open University in the UK. And it's built to make open access more easy to access. And I'm going to copy the link and paste it in the chat. We also have OA Eister. It's kind of hard to pronounce. It's in partnership with OCLC. You may have heard of them or not. The University of Michigan developed this bibliographic catalog of material using a specific metadata protocol. I will post that in chat as well. I have too many tabs open. There's also the directory of open access journals, which is called Doge. It's an extensive index of diverse open access journals from around the world. And if you're looking for something similar for books, there's Dobe as well. It's a community-driven discovery service. It indexes and provides access to scholarly, peer-reviewed open access books. I will post the link for Doge as well if you're interested. Yeah. Now, what happens if you're looking for open access material at AU? Well, we have a way to do that. So if you go to our Find Resources page, it's on the main page, I believe. Let me just check. Make sure I'm saying the right thing here. Yes, it's the second tab on the first page of the library page. And there you'll see a list of resources for different areas, subject areas basically, and specific databases. Now those databases will be marked with certain logos. And one of those logos is the open access logo. So it looks like a little orange lock that's been unlocked. So if you see that icon, then it's an open access journal, or the resource contains open access material. It's also worth mentioning that AU Press, they publish books and journals under open licenses. I think 99% of those are open access licenses, and those are marked, and those authors kind of still retain copyright over their work, but they let others benefit from open access availability. So you know how to find open access, but what about publishing your own? So open access is relatively new. Like I said, it started in 1991, but it's still kind of gaining steam. It's a relatively newer form of scholarly publishing. And many open access journals comply with well-established peer review processes, and they maintain high publishing standards. So they're not just ragtag group of unreviewed material. Typically, there are two routes for publishing open access. We call that the green route and the gold route. I won't say most, many publishers, often both access routes. When we talk about the green model, it's a model that allows authors to publish their work into any journal while self-archiving accepted or peer-reviewed manuscripts into research repositories under an open license. So there's a few restrictions to this model. Usually there's an embargo period before the manuscript can be available on those repositories. And the journal published version of the article remains closed behind a print paywall. So just to reiterate, you might have the finished version of an article immediately available on the closed journal, and people can pay for that and read it. And in 6, 12, or maybe sometimes even 36 months, you can read a earlier version of that article that has been peer reviewed but not 100% finished on a different repository. So often those are institutional repositories. There is the second option as well, the gold open access route. So it removes all these barriers. for a little money, of course. Um, if you pay article processing charges, those are called APCs, that immediately releases your work to a freely available open access journal. So it makes sure that your work can be discovered quickly and widely. So the difference there is you're paying and the work is immediately available in a journal specifically for open access articles. There is a third route as well. It's less common. It's called the hybrid journal route. So these are closed subscription-based journals, but they give authors the option to pay an ABC to publish individual articles with an open access license. There's a bit of a potential issue there, I think. It might privilege those with access to funding, and the journal is collecting APCs and subscription fees at the same time, so it's kind of like double dipping a little bit there. Now, these APCs, the article processing charges, they can be really expensive, but there are some resources that can help. So there is funding for academics and professionals here at the research office. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat here. Too many tabs. There we go. And so it's called ARF, like ARF, the Academic Research Fund. It helps defray the costs of publication in online open access peer-reviewed publications. The next kind of option for you, if you're looking to reduce those costs, is the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, CKRN. I'll drop that link in the chat as well. Whoops. That's all my tabs there. Perfect. So the CKRN agreements are let authors basically be affiliated with Athabasca University, and they might receive discounts on APCs when you're publishing with select publishers. There's also Sherpa Fact. It's just a searchable database that helps you confirm if the journal that you're wishing to publish really complies with the funding agency's requirement for open access. So those funding agencies will often be like the tri-agency funding in Canada. So we have SIR, we have NSERC, and SHRC. You probably heard of those. Those funding agencies, they require their authors to publish their work in open access journals. I'm trying to remember what year they started asking for that, but I don't quite remember, so I'm not going to say. At Athabasca specifically, we have a open access research outputs policy, and that explicitly supports open access to research outputs. So there's lots of support out there. Lots available. Another thing to remember about Athabasca specifically is that we have a bit more of a restrictive intellectual property policy. So it's a document that provides clarity around rights and responsibilities in relation to the creation and ownership of intellectual property within the university by employees. If you want to read this document yourself, it is available online. You can just search Athabasca University intellectual property policy and it'll be there. Basically, it can be broken down into 4 categories. The first is that property created by an individual in the course of administrative and operational activities of the university is owned by the university. Any intellectual property created by an individual in the course of their teaching and learning responsibilities, that's also owned by the university. Intellectual property that results from academic research activities, that falls into a more complex category. They call it shared responsibility, so that's something you want to inquire about for sure. But intellectual property that results from external research, that's always owned by the creator. And if you're not sure what category your work falls under, just please contact the Copyright Office. And remember, whoever owns the copyright, that's the party that makes decisions on how to license that work. So if you wanted to openly license your work, for example, you'd have to own copyright to it. That being said, I'm establishing a process, hopefully, where people can apply to get their work released under an open license by the university if the university owns copyright. So let's say you get your work reviewed and you're ready to be accepted for publication. You're probably going to be asked to write a asked to sign a copyright transfer agreement. This is a CTA. It usually transfers most, if not all, of your rights over to the publisher. That means that you're no longer the copyright holder, so you can't make decisions about licensing. If you want to share your work with colleagues and students, print or electronic, that might be infringing. So it's possible actually to negotiate your copyright transfer agreement with the publisher by offering something that we call an author's addendum. Many publishers will comply to the addendum, or they'll offer a new agreement that includes rights that were requested in the addendum. And don't be discouraged when you're negotiating with your publisher in order to retain rights that best serve your current needs or the future needs of your work. I'd like to stress that negotiation should always be a part of the publication process. It's important to consider things like attribution, preserving the integrity of your work, future educational use of your work, future professional use of your work, when you're thinking about how you want your articles to be used. If you want to negotiate those rights, you might want to attach something, what we call the author's addendum, to your copyright agreement. We have the Scholar's Copyright Addendum engine. It actually generates one for you. It generates a PDF form that you can attach to the copyright agreement, and it hopefully will let you retain certain rights. I'm going to pop that in the chat. More Canadian specific, we have Spark Author Addendum. It allows researchers to keep certain rights, like if you want to redistribute your work, something like that. I think it's more Canadian specific. That's in the chat as well. Now all journals are good journals. There are predatory journals. So just like traditional publishing, it's a good idea to watch out for these. So these predatory publishers, they'll present themselves as legitimate open access publishers, but they might use questionable practices. They might use an inadequate or incomplete peer review process. They might focus mainly on collecting the APCs rather than the quality of the scholarship. And they also might mask the identity of journal staff and the actual fees required for publication. So there might be some surprises there. Thankfully, there are some tools available to make sure that you have a trustworthy publication venue. I like Think, Check, Submit. It's a great little tool. I can put in the journal and see there what the details of the journal are. And if you want to know more about this topic, check out our predatory journals and predatory conferences LibGuide. Pop that in the chat. And that is the end of our open access introduction. It's very sort of dip your feet in, but if you have any questions, please let me know. As I mentioned before, this is an example of an attribution. So we have the title, which is Introduction to Open Access. We have my name, we have the source, and we have the license. So the license really should be linked here to the actual terms on the Creative Commons website, but this slide software doesn't let me link, so fortunately nothing there. And here's just some of the sources I used to source the material today. It's all open access, which allows me to re-release it under an open access license. Actually, an OER license, which we'll talk about more on Thursday. So we have lots of time for questions, and if we have time after that, we have a short little quiz so we can test your knowledge. So let me pull up the chat here. Anyone can hop off mic or type in the chat if you have any questions. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Julie. All right, I'll give folks a minute to think if they have any questions or to type in the chat. No rush. I'm going to pull up the little game we have and just to test your knowledge. And people can start hopping in there. It's just a link to the Slido. I saw the new president using Slido. I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I should do that too. Over. And you should be able to just click on that link, but if it doesn't work, let me know. We'll see how it goes. There's Caroline. I'm going to actually share that screen. Perfect. You're welcome, Rod. Thanks for coming. We have Jody, Caroline, and Kathy so far. We'll just wait a couple of minutes and see if anyone else wants to play, but if you don't know, no pressure. Aretha as well. Awesome. All right, I'm going to start it, but if you are struggling to get in, just pop it in chat and let me know, and I'll make sure you get in. So just 10 questions. The first question is, if you are publishing your open access article via the green route, will you need to pay article processing charges? And this is kind of a sneak peek of our game tonight, so you'll have the advantage. All right, all four have answered. Let's take a look. And there is a big split there. Awesome. 75% correct. We have a three-way tie for the lead. Next question. Are academics always required to pay their own article processing charges? So the answers are no. The author's funding body or institution might be able to pay the APC. Or yes, authors are always responsible for their own work. All right, let's take a look. Everyone's correct. Awesome. All right, question 3. Readers might may copy portions of open access articles to incorporate into their own work. True or false? I will admit this is a bit of a trick question. All right, let's take a look. True. The answer is actually false. So specifically, open access allows you to share the whole article. You can't take parts of it and manipulate them unless it's under existing copyright law. So this is why it's a bit of a trick question. You can technically copy small portions of text, like quotes and stuff like that, but you'll need to fall under an exemption if you want to use larger parts of it. So Jody is the only one with 100% so far. All right, green open access can be expensive. True or false? False, green open access is free for researchers. Or true, the fees are usually subsidized by funding bodies. All right, big split there, and you are correct. It is usually free for researchers. Jody is in the lead still. Question 5. Is CC BY an open access license? No, it allows for derivatives, meaning it counts as an OER license, or yes. Take a look. Yes, it's actually no. So CC BY allows for the creation of derivatives, and that means it's OER, Open Educational Resources. If you have the ND, so CC BY ND, that means no derivatives, and that is usually what counts as open access. So open access means that you can share the work freely, but you can't modify it. When you modify it, that's OER. So that's a tough question for sure. Question 6. Could an open access license be described as some rights reserved? The answers are no, the copyright holder has not reserved any rights, or yes, the copyright holder has specified they are retaining some rights, but not all. There we go. See. Everyone is 100% right. Awesome. Jody's still in the lead. Getting to the end there. Question 7. If you can read it on the internet for free, it counts as open access. True or false? So it could be true. That's the only way you can read it for free. Or it can be false. Only resources released under an open license can be considered open access. Somebody with the quick draw there. They're very ready to answer. All right, all 4 have answered. Let's take a look. The answer is false. 75% of you are correct. Only resources that can be released, only resources under an open license can be considered open access. So just because you find something on the internet doesn't mean it's necessarily licensed in such a way that you can share it with other people without permission. Jody is running away with it. All right, question 8. Is it true that open access means an article is not copyrighted? Answer 1 is no. Choosing to publish through an open access channel does not mean the article is not copyrighted. Or yes, the CTA means that the copyright is transferred away. Some very quick answers there. All right. Yes, you are right again. Perfect. Question 9. Can you download an open access article and make copies to distribute to your friends? True or false? Got 3 answers this time. No, that's a violation of copyright. Yes, with the author's permission. Or yes, that's what open access means. All right. And the answer is actually that is what open access means. So open access is a permission granted to everybody at the same time, so you don't have to ask permission. That's one of the main benefits. It's really awesome. Usually other material, you could share it as well, but you'd need permission. But with open access licenses particularly, you can just share it, which is really awesome. Your friends can distribute it to their friends too. One last question. What does APC stand for? Does it stand for access per copyright, article processing charge, or author produced creation? Need one more answer. Oh, there it is. Let's take a look. Article processing charge. That's right. Awesome. So we will crown Jody and Caroline as joint winners. Congratulations. And thank you all so much for attending today's presentation. Like I said, this afternoon will be the open access game of open access. I'll play that game with the other librarians. And I'm going to pop the link in the chat for that too. I know there's a lot of links today, but one more won't hurt. So if you want to join us, we'll play together, and because I know all the answers, I'll be asking chat for their help. So looks like we're just on time. Take care, and thanks for coming.